All right, we're going to get started. So we're going to do it a little bit differently tonight. Normally, I walk around and hand over the mics for questions. So we're just going to have a standing podium over here tonight. So we're going to do about a 30-minute presentation for the debate. And then anyone who has questions for either speaker, specify if it's for both speakers or one or the other. So that's it on the rules. We're going to get started. So our speakers tonight, I think everybody here probably knows them, but in case you don't, Brandon Wark, founded Free State Colorado, does all sorts of liberty things. He won the Vern Bickle Award, which is right over there, for liberty a few months ago. And he recently ran for city council. Our other speaker tonight, Mattheus Von Guttenberg, has done several presentations here. He's written for Bitcoin Magazine, and he's a former member of the Free State Project. So please give it up for Brandon and Mattheus. Take this. You're on mic. Thanks. Oh, that's sweet.
Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me? All right. I'm going to start my watch here. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's a pleasure to be among friends and liberty-minded individuals for sure. So the resolution we're talking about tonight that we're debating is, should libertarians be politically involved in order to make a more pro-liberty society ultimately, right? Is that the gist of it?
For themselves and for society at wide.
For themselves and society at wide. So I would say, of course, individuals who believe in liberty and freedom have to get involved. Not only should they get involved to increase the amount of liberty we have in society, but it's pretty much your duty in my mind. You know what I mean? And if you know me, you probably know that that's what I spend so much of my time doing. But what I'm not saying, I want to get that out of the way right away. I'm not saying that that's the only thing you should be spending your time on, of course, right? There's a lot of other important things we have in our lives besides politics, thankfully, and that's just as important. But at the same time, you got to get involved on some level. I really do believe that, ultimately. And I hope to convince anybody on the fence tonight that there's a good reason why you should. I'm also not saying that you need to be involved with a political party. I know a lot of us here are libertarians. You don't necessarily need to be part of the Libertarian Party, part of the Republican Party, Democrat Party, whatever, in order to be effective, in order to have some sort of influence and increase the amount of liberty in society. So those two things I'm not saying. But what I am saying is that we should be involved for liberty, and here's some of the reasons why. The first thing is, we live in a highly politicized society, right? I mean, nearly every aspect of our lives is at least regulated, influenced, or controlled by the government, right? Not just the roads, not just Colfax that we drove on to get here, some of us, but the car we drive, the ability, its gas mileage, the kind of gas we can put in the fuel, the heat that we use to heat our homes, the natural gas that flows into our houses, the electricity that comes into our homes, the water that comes into our homes. These are all government-controlled, government-regulated things, right? We can't escape politics. That's ultimately what it is, right? Our jobs, our employers, our paychecks, pretty much everything we do, there's government's hands in it. And it sucks, right? That's why most of us are libertarians, because we hate that idea that the government has so much control, so much power over our lives, and we'd rather not have that, right? Of course. But that's why we have to get involved. That's why we have to do something about it. Because if we don't, if liberty-minded individuals, if libertarians remove themselves from the political equation, well, who else are you leaving there, right? I want to see more libertarians have influence and power. More libertarians having influence in government, right? I want more libertarian policy decisions. When we're sitting at the table of power in the state capitol in Denver, then we're winning. We will create a free state of Colorado once we have enough liberty influence in the state capitol building, right? So that's one of the big things here. We need to have more libertarians involved in government, because if we don't, if we remove ourselves from those things still exist, right? I know a lot of great libertarians, a lot of people who believe in liberty and freedom, and they just want to ignore government, right? You want to ignore it, you want to pretend that it doesn't exist, but it still does exist, right? Even if we don't look at it, it's still a problem, right? You can ignore that check engine light in your car, the oil puddle underneath it, but ultimately you're going to have to reckon with it at some point if you want to keep driving. We live in a society that is highly politicized, and regardless if we participate or not, that politicization is going to be a part of our lives, right? It might determine whether we have a job tomorrow. It might determine whether our businesses, our schools are shut down, that they're doing unspeakable things to our children in schools, things like that. That's something that we have a duty to stand up to speak out on, and to get involved. So that's kind of point one, is this highly politicized society that we have. If we remove ourselves from it, it's still there, it doesn't go away. So libertarians removing themselves from the political scene is just giving up influence, giving up power, giving up our ability to have a voice and a seat at the table, which is ultimately moving us in the wrong direction towards more authoritarianism and away from liberty. The second part I want to really bring up is that libertarian ideas, libertarians in general, have made impacts. Right? That's a big thing I hear often is people say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing we can do to have an influence. We definitely can. And there's definitely been a lot of instances in which liberty has been a winning issue at the ballot box and in our own state government, for example. Got a couple notes here on that. So, we're thankful here in Colorado that we have had such a pro-liberty minded individuals involved in government, generally speaking, right? Libertarians have made an impact. In 1972, it was a referred initiative to get on the ballot to create Colorado sunshine laws, which created financial disclosures for politicians, registration for lobbyists, and open meetings laws. Colorado has some great sunshine laws. If it wasn't for liberty-minded individuals getting organized, getting together, putting it on the ballot, we wouldn't have those things. Can you imagine politicians pushing those things themselves, right? Oh, we need to disclose our finances. Nobody's going to agree to that. But it's individuals who believe in liberty and freedom having that influence on the outside of politics, deciding to get involved, deciding to have a voice, and deciding to change our structure. And that's been the way since 1972. Libertarians have made a huge difference. And I might be using that term very loosely here in terms of libertarians. I'm a big tent libertarian. But obviously, these are pro-liberty ideas, right? In 2002, Colorado voters passed campaign finance reform, creating limits on contributions and disclosures. We might not have that if it wasn't for liberty-minded individuals, Coloradans, getting involved, throwing their hat in the ring, and deciding to get organized, spend money, and get involved in politics, right? That's important. 1990, Colorado passed term limits. Citizen measure. Citizens put that on the ballot. Liberty-minded Coloradans got organized, got on the ballot, raised money, and made it happen, right? These are victories that are tangible, that have fundamentally changed the political landscape here in Colorado, all because liberty-minded individuals decided to get involved. 1992, the biggest pro-liberty measure possibly in the entire country. One of the biggest, best things we have going for us in our state constitution is Tabor, right? Huge, Tabor, right? So awesome there, very important. We could go on, I could talk about that later. 2012, marijuana, obviously. 2022, the Independence Institute, the very building we're in, actually got a measure on the ballot to lower the state income tax. So every single person in here is paying less taxes because libertarian organization like the Independence Institute got involved and had an impact. So that's kind of my fundamental thoughts there.
Mattheus, you get 6 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Am I on? Yes. Can you set your watch for me? I'm not gonna.
I got it.
You got it. Okay. Thank you for the opening statement, Brandon, and thank you for articulating, your two major points. I just want to sort of reiterate them back to you a little bit so I understand where you're coming from before I give my points. The first point seems to be that we live in a world where politics touches and governs and has tentacles and everything, and so there is very little escape from it. Even running out into the woods and hiding, whatever, you're still, there's still chemical sprays in your air above you and all sorts of stuff, right? So escape sort of is not really, possible, let's say. And the second point is that there are political advances that you can point to, right? That are genuine and real and worthwhile and durable, right? That are valuable for us, in our society as we try to pursue liberty. And I think both those things are true, right? I mean, I don't disagree with those 2 points. What occurred to me as I was listening to Brandon, is that though he seemed to take a general point, which was that maybe I should speak to you directly. You seem to take a general point that the premise of the conversation or the debate is that people should get involved in politics or not. And I think that you can make an airtight argument for at least any amount of political action is going to be good. And I won't argue with you on that, right? But I think looking at should most people get involved in political action, or is political action what we should be spending most of our activism time on, or something more like that, I think that's not right. And so I think you can carve out a totally indefensible position, a totally defensible position that says, hey, look, because of political action, this happened, unambiguously good. Because of political action, unambiguously good. But I tend to think that most libertarians should not really get involved in politics to a large degree. And to the extent that libertarians should or do get involved in politics, it should be to a minor degree. So I think a minor amount of libertarians should be political oriented, and it should just occupy a minor amount of their time. And the reasons for that, I have 3 sort of general reasons. Is that I think in the first place there's an ethical problem with participating in the political system, and so I take your point, right, that there are real battles to be won for liberty, and so there's an ethical landscape there where we can win or lose depending on your political success or not, right? But I also see sort of medium and long-term cost, which is that participating in political processes normalizes and legitimizes those processes. And that is, I think, a bad thing because those processes are criminal. Though they are violent and aggressive and extractive and exploitative and predatory. And so to the degree that we spend our time and energy and wherewithal and sweat and blood participating in this, playing this game of Monopoly, then we're actually like legitimizing culturally and socially that this is actually the way you change society. And I think that that's locking in a lot of people into a single track frame of how to fight for liberty is by playing Monopoly every round over and over and over again. And so, I'm not going to argue that there are certain games that can be won and there's valuable things there, but I really think that we should consider the long-run cost of popularizing and legitimizing political action as the source of, or as the, major source of political activism or of libertarian activism. I think there's lots of forms of activism that are legitimate and maybe even more legitimate and more powerful than political activism. The second point is a point of strategy, right? Is that libertarians are, by and large, let's say, not good at politics, right? We're not capable. Like the terrain, we're not built for that terrain. Like that domain is extractive, it's deceitful, it's duplicitous, it favors people, it favors the unscrupulous, right? So Hayek has a great chapter in The Road to Serfdom called Why the Worst Get on Top, right? And he sort of lays out the sort of game theory about how that happens, right? Hoppe has a similar chapter in Economics and Ethics of Private Property, right? And like the idea that pure noble-hearted libertarians are going to climb to this top of bloody skulls to plant the ANCAP flag on top of it, I think is unlikely because we're just not built for it. Like the traits that the political domain rewards are toxic traits, right? They're traits that they force you to rationalize decisions. They force you to build and play off coalitions against each other. They force you to engage in soundbite little manipulative domains type things. Like these are not generative, positive marketplace traits that we see businessmen and entrepreneurs orient towards. And so I think that we're just like not really cut out for it. Now there are some exceptional people, right? And I think you're one of them that take to the domain preternaturally well. Right, and they're charismatic, and they're capable, and they're scrupulous, and they can read people, and all of that. And so, like when we have, superstars for that realm, if we have a Barack Obama in the liberty, like for God's sakes, have him run for office. You know what I mean? But most people are not for that, cut out for that, and I think that it's a mistake to suggest that they should line up to try to participate in this when it's against the grain. And the third point is that I think it's as a matter of personal hygiene. I think that getting involved in the political action is corrosive. I think that it actually warps you and orients your mind and your behavior and your thinking around winning these types of zero-sum predatory exploitative games. Not that things happen to you, or I'm not casting aspersions on you, but I think that there is actually a real cost to people's character the longer they spend time in political action. And so I think that we as libertarians should not spend most of our time, most of our people, most of our energy pursuing that. But I'm open to having a conversation about it.
Back and forth.
Great. No, those are wonderful points. Really appreciate your perspective on things. And I think there's a lot of truth to what you've said. But I would ultimately say that, we got to set our sights in our neighborhoods, right? We have 3,000 governments here in Colorado. That's your special districts, your school board, your city council. There are literally 3,000 governments. So, if we shrink it down to our neighborhood level, our own positions in our communities, that's where we should be spending most of our time ultimately, because that's going to have the biggest impact, on whether our neighborhood is safe, whether our streets are paved and there's good drainage on our streets, and that our schools are doing the right thing, So ultimately, I think that individuals we cannot abdicate that role and that responsibility we have as being leaders in our own community. And heck, I think that libertarians have some of the best ideas in terms of political philosophy out there.
Sure.
So that's why I would say it's more valuable than ever that we focus our sights in locally, on the smallest level, and have as big of an impact as you can at that level.
I think that's true, right? I think all other things equal, the smaller the scale, the more likely to succeed. So I think that's, obviously you should start with yourself, being a self-owner, self-governor, right? And then your family, and then you're trying to take over your street, whatever. But I think that's I just want to touch on a point you made. The libertarians have the best ideas about political philosophy, and I actually don't think that matters like almost at all, because most people are not morally convicted in any regard, and they're not economically knowledgeable in any regard. And so the idea of electoral politics, like if you want to discuss like aristocracy, or if you want to discuss like a noble elite theory, or like a king, anything else, like we can go that road. But in terms of like electoral politics, if we're presuming constitutional, a constitutional republic or democracy, then I actually don't think it matters much how airtight and scintillating and brilliant the arguments libertarians are, because that's not what's going to determine the outcome. It's what's going to determine the outcome are the masses of the people and what they believe, and how well their minds can be bent and turned and fitted into little Play-Doh molds for other ideas, And so, like, I agree. Obviously, I think we're the best, but I just don't like. I think that's more romantic than like efficacious of a point to make. Like, could everyone in the neighborhood read Hazlitt and understand Economics 1 lesson, understand the problems? Of course they could, but they won't. So if they won't, then what does it mean that, various people here have the right ideas about public works or about taxes or about inflation or whatever? I'm just sort of, I don't know, cynical, I guess, about the idea that we can educate a lot of people into following our ideas. Yeah.
Right. And I would say there's always been just a small, group of people who've ever had influence, right? You want to talk about like the idea of elite theory, or this idea that it's only, the 3%. You see that all the time American Revolution, right? 3% of the people actually fought in the war. It's always going to be a small, tireless, irate minority keen on lighting bushfires in the minds of men,
Sure.
On the individual level in the smallest community. And that's where we can have the biggest impact. But that's why, because like you said, maybe so few people have that kind of moral conviction. So few people actually have that wherewithal to make good moral decisions and economic calculations, or understand the problem with economic calculation instead. Yeah. That's why it's so important that more liberty-minded individuals, libertarians, what have you, be that voice and do what we can and really try and do that. Because as much as I wish, and as much as I do believe that politics is downstream of culture, right? Culture is ultimately what a lot of people are voting on, is a lot of these cultural issues and these other ideas that have come up through the cultural mainstream. We're at a point in modern day America where politics is part of our culture. You know what I mean? That it's a little bit of a feedback loop.
Sure.
And they're so intertwined.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That the most famous man on earth is Donald Trump, right? And he's not just a political force, but a cultural force. And that really shapes things. So ultimately, if we want to have an impact on the cultural level as well, at least this point in our history, we got to get involved politically.
No, sure. And I think it's fair, right? And I think an even stronger case could be Ron Paul, right? It's like, Ron Paul is an explicitly libertarian political figure that exerted outstanding cultural force in our favor, right? Not just in some favor, but in our favor. But I think that if that's true, like if what you're really aiming for then is cultural power, then politics is a vehicle for it, but it's not like the most direct vehicle for it. Like there's all sorts of other direct vehicles for cultural expression, right? That's starting a website, that's running podcasts, that's interviewing people, that's blogging, that's taking a bullhorn to the street corner and saying the end is near. Like there's all sorts of different ways to shape people's minds to accept or be interested in these ideas that don't involve you joining, a gang of thieves and all arguing in your, Robert's Rules of Order committee style about how to distribute the loot that guys took last year from whatever. And so, like, I think that can happen, and I think that does happen. That politicians exert cultural force in this direction you're talking about, but I guess I also want to say that I think people want to rationalize that political action is more useful than it is. And I'm not accusing you of this, even though you're my opponent for the time being. But I think that politics is a kind of like get liberty quick scheme in a lot of people's minds. And they think, oh, if we just get this and solve this and turn this and it's in this lever, then we'll have liberty. And it doesn't work. And there are examples you gave where it did work, right? There's Tabor and the Sunshine, type stuff. But I guess I sort of see politics as like a way to hopefully affect change without having to do the actual like like personal work. It's like an externalization, right? It's like I'm gonna go and do this thing outside of me and ask and participate in this, Rube Goldberg machine so that the world becomes better. And that, I think, sounds good. It's kind of like voting to me is kind of like I'm going to go to mass and I'm going to confess to the priest and all my sins are forgiven and I can go, spend the rest of the year doing whatever I want because, don't you know I confess every year, And so like I think that there's a kind of mental attitude a lot of people have about political action where they're inclined to think it's rosier and more successful than it is because the effort to participate is so low. You know what I mean?
No, and that's a very fair point. I think a lot of people see politics in a very short time preference, right? We're like, hey, if we just turn things around in 2026 here in Colorado, we're going to be golden. That's it. That's the turning point, And if we lose in 2026, it's over. We're done. The state's done. We got to flee and hide and run away. You know what I mean? But it's a very short term type of perspective, and I get it, right? A lot of people think that, but ultimately, it is bigger than that. We have to create institutions. We have to create cultural change. We have to have authors and cultural figures that espouse pro-liberty ideas if we want to see long-lasting term success. But we need to fight the short-term battle. You're not going to live to be in the long term if you don't survive the short term, right? You have to be able to take care of your short-term needs. COVID is the perfect example of this. You know what I mean? I don't know about anybody else, but I was like, oh, great. I'm going to lose my job because I'm not willing to get the injection. I'm going to be excluded from society. I don't know what's going to happen, but that's that short-term battle we have to fight ultimately there. And that could happen again. We've seen how the government can get. So we have to fight. Politics is just a short-term fight. It's important because we've seen the stakes. We've seen where we're at. We've seen what they're willing to do to us, right? We've seen what these politicians are willing to do to us. We cannot ignore that. We cannot only focus on the long term. We have to focus on the short term, especially in really challenging times. But yes, we have to work on building long-term, medium and long-term institutions and cultural change and traditions and norms that honor the spirit of liberty and ideas of the philosophy of freedom. Ultimately, of course, politics is only a very short-term thing. Sure, you pass a tax cut, and then 2 years later, somebody else is in office and they put the tax cut back in. You can only fight in the short term. That's all you can do. So I do understand that ultimately, but you have to fight in the short term, or else you might not have a long term.
Yeah, no. I mean, I hear you, and I think that I think Plato made a good point when he says that the cost of abandoning politics is being ruled by your inferiors, right? And so there's obviously a huge risk of nobody is there to hold back the tide, right now. So I wonder, my question for you is like, what do you see actually as the optimum amount of time and people and energy that should be devoted to political activism as such, distinct from cultural or social or raising kids or whatever it is? And what is the length of value? How far could what's the time dimension where politics stops being useful anymore? Could you win the entire game with just political action? Could you get run down the whole field and score a touchdown with nothing but political action? Or you're no, this is just good for first downs, and we need the first down now, but we really got other things for later. How do you see that?
A great question, and I think great point too. You're right. I mean, there's no perfect answer to that, right? For certain individuals, politics might be your calling, or you might feel invested in it, or you might want to do more than average. But I think everybody has a bare minimum duty to do. And oftentimes people will think that's just voting every year. And that's not enough. I think at least showing up to your city council meetings, showing up to town halls, showing up and having a conversation with your neighbor, paying attention to what's going on at the bare minimum. And I don't know what that answer is for everybody. Everybody's in different stages in life, right? Maybe you're retired and you can devote more time to it. Maybe you're working 3 jobs just to make ends meet. No fault, there.
Yeah, what's Evie's duty?
You do what you can, and you do it, but you have to do something, right? And we can only do what we can, and there's no problem with that ultimately. But I do think you're right. It's not a long-term battle. There's not a huge win. But let me just give you a quick example here. So Ryan Gonzalez up in House District 50 in Greeley, I door knocked for him a bunch of times last year. He had lost by 500 votes 2 years ago in 2022. In 2024, he lost with 130 votes. It was something crazy. But he won with 500 votes last year. And I went out and door knocked. We got a group of libertarians, registered libertarians, out door knocking for him. He won. He won barely. And I can tell you right now, he is so grateful and he is trying to be the biggest voice for liberty. Monday, he met with Jared Polis because he's running they call it the tamale bill. It passed in New Mexico already, but basically it's a food freedom bill. And that's one of the few things Jared Polis is good on is food freedom, his libertarian side or whatever. The very small part of him is libertarian, but food freedom is one of it. So the idea in Colorado is you can be on the street corner selling food that doesn't need to be refrigerated, right? Like peanuts or bags of popcorn or whatever, right? There's no law against that statewide. But if it has to be refrigerated, it has to be kept at a certain temperature, it's illegal for you to sell that without getting the permitting process. We just saw this big story here in Denver where they poured bleach over that guy's food on the taco truck. People were going crazy over it. I don't know if you saw that. But he's actually sponsoring a bill. And it's like libertarians helped get him elected through this direct action. I mean, it's the most perfect example. And then I was just talking to him and I said, can I bring this up? Because the bill hasn't been announced yet. But he said, yes, you can bring it up tonight. But he's going to have a bill and that the governor wants to pass in his last term. And it's like, wow, if we didn't have libertarians actually getting organized and getting effective, then this might not have happened. I mean, that's an amazing thing. And it just shows the power of small groups of individuals making this effort. And I know that's a small example to your broader point of, yeah, sure, it's not going to, at the end of the day, he didn't repeal the Federal Reserve, you know what I mean? He didn't restore sound money. And maybe it'll be repealed. Maybe it's not going to be that big of a win for liberty, but we do something, right? And it's just, to your point of the question of how much do we do, what's acceptable, you just do what you can. Do what you can when you can and just try. But we got to try.
I want to ask about this because you expressed a second time the idea of duty, and the first time you said it, it sounded a little different. But now it sounds like when you're talking about duty, it sounds like we have a political duty. It sounds like, the way I heard you, right? And I agree, we all have a duty to affect positive change in the society we live in, right? That we have a duty to treat other people, in good and positive, generative ways, to produce value for other people, to arc toward a better world, et cetera, et cetera. But I could see that duty being satisfied in 12 different directions. But it sounded like you believe that we have a distinctly political duty, right? So even if I'm a superhero in 11 out of 12 other dimensions, but I have no political involvement at all, I'm still shirking my duty in your mind.
On some level. And that's just my biases, my own personal opinion, right, on things. And part of me, maybe it's the frustration of seeing things going where they are in Colorado and just being like, folks, like Rebecca Kelty won with 3 votes last year. You know what I mean? We see some of these races be razor thin margins. We see things happening. It's like, guys, if we just had, I never say this to any specific individual, but generally speaking, if we just had a bigger turnout of individuals who believe in liberty that are involved, we could have a free state, right, ultimately.
But there's an opportunity cost to that. Right? Like, what would it take for the people to be 5% or 10% more in tune with what's going on and able to mobilize, to solve, to get the 3, it's like 4th and inches. It's like we need just a tiny push to get the first down. Like what's the opportunity cost of thousands or a million people potentially being ready for that or doing for that versus what else are they doing in their lives versus what else is going on in the world versus other things they care about. So I agree that you can point to a bunch of things that are seen, right? Like we did this. When we didn't do this bad thing happened, this bad thing happened. But I'm asking you about the unseen, right? Like I'm asking you about like it may be true that if we all spent 6 hours every month walking the streets and picking up trash and door knocking and whatever, X outcome could happen. Right, I won't argue with that, but how do you weigh that? And I guess you're not, some central planner, right? So it's up to each person. But you're exhorting people to do more in this particular domain, which suggests that you have some knowledge or belief that people are that they're not doing enough in this domain, i.e., that people are actually chronically distorted against this somehow. And you're saying, no, you need to turn you 10% over.
No, that's a fair point. It's a fair criticism for sure. But ultimately, Mattheus, I want to ask you, your perspective. You mentioned 11 other things that people could be doing. Yeah. So, political action, I think there's a good case for it. I think there's great wins we can celebrate. But what would you say is the next best thing, based on the arguments I'm making, that somebody could be better spending their time doing to help achieve liberty, not just for themselves, but for their community? And it could be short-term, it could be long-term. But sure. What's just an example, I guess, that say, oh, man, I shouldn't have spent all this time on politics. I could have been doing...
Yeah, well, it depends on, there's different forms of different time horizons. that's different things that are going to appeal to different people's skills and interests. So I think cultural activism is a major force. So if people can play music, if people like to speak and give interviews, if people like to write, if people like to have any kind of expressive performance in the world, there's 100 different mediums for that. You could be improv, comic, actor, and do libertarian cultural activism through that, right? I think that there's educational activism, right? And I think that there's reading and lecturing and writing and podcasting or donating money to such places like FEE or the Mises Institute or, who knows, right? Independent Institute, right? So there's obviously an academic and there's an academic and an educational angle where even though I sort of poo-pooed the power of ideas a little bit earlier, don't get me wrong, like I'm a man of ideas. So like I recognize that ideas put into certain brains change those lives completely. And we obviously want to have some non-zero amount of investment in doing that in the world because you don't know where those brains are, right? It could be right here, right? I think that there's more, local and sort of prosaic types of activism, like starting a family, like raising a family, right? Making children, investing in your home, right? Investing in your community. Maybe you don't have kids, right? But you're going to do some kind of good for your community, and you're going to be known for that, and you're going to exert positive social force as a libertarian in your community, or raising a libertarian family, right? That's not like explicitly a form of activism here. It is in New Hampshire, right? They've got a whole contingent of Breedom for Freedom people that just want to, get married and have a bunch of kids so they can change the population numbers, I think there's other types too, right? There's like investment in your own personal development, right? Like what would it mean if you became 10%, happier with your work? What would it mean if you had 10% better friendships? What would it mean if you had 10% better health? Right? Like there's second order and third order effects on all of these things all the way down. And like, that's practical freedom for me. Like we're talking about freedom in terms of like political liberty, freedom from the state and all of that. That's true. But even if the state is totalitarian, but you have tremendous agency in your life, you are actually free. And so I think people should invest much more than they currently do in their own lives and in their own bodies and their own financial position and in their own relationships and in their own health and all sorts of things so that they actually can move through the world with power and agency to affect the kind of life they want to live, regardless of all the smoldering ruins around them, right? So I think these are all valid forms of activism, and maybe there's a half dozen more I can't think of right now, but I think political activism is one of the slices in that Trivial Pursuit pie, right? I'm not saying that it should never be done under any circumstances. It shouldn't run against Hitler because, geez, you could be worse than Hitler, Like, I'm not saying that, but I feel like it should be seen for, as you said, the short-term gain that it is, the tactical, short-term, quick win kind of thing, and not the like main horse or the main engine that's going to be pulling libertarian victory for us.
And I don't disagree with you at all in terms of, what's more important for a person, right? Maybe you should invest in your family, in a garden, have some chickens, you do things like that. Start a co-op or a little neighborhood garage sale every year where you're creating these like free market, black market little things, where people can evade taxes or whatever. Like that's awesome. I love all that stuff. But I would say, I don't know about anybody else, but I feel like, and maybe it's just I spend too much time online or whatever, but it seems like we're in apocalyptic times, revolutionary times, where it's like, yeah, that's great. I can have a book club and we can read Human Action again, and it's awesome. Don't discount that whatsoever, right? But when they come and knock on my door and say, you need to get injected or you're going to get thrown into camp or your guns are now being confiscated.
You turn to page 741 and you show them.
Or you know what I mean? Or you're like, oh, my paycheck's less this week. I can't pay my bills. Or, oh, they just shut off natural gas in my community. And this is literally what they're doing in Colorado. Oh, guess what? Now we're on 100% renewables and we have rolling blackouts. And now all of a sudden, I can't actually use natural gas to heat my home or cook my food anymore and this and that. We have all these state mandates. We're at such a point, and I do agree with you generally speaking, but I think because, and I could be wrong, I accept that, but the point we're in right now, where it feels like we're in this post-COVID, post-9/11, whatever you want to call it, world, where political assassinations are becoming not just normalized, but celebrated, where it feels like every day something crazy could happen, and it's like we almost expect it, where things are getting extremism and fanaticism, it's more important than ever that we get organized. Because even if you as an individual have agency, even if you as an individual have great health and you're well-read and you have all these wonderful things going for you, awesome, good. That's the ideal for everybody. But at the same time, that's not going to help you when a gang of 10 people jump you in the street, you know what I mean? Because you have different political views, right? We have to get organized, we have to do that, and we have to do it now. So I have this sense of urgency, and that's maybe where my idea of duty comes from, is seeing this and be like, guys, we are going to bad places. But it's going to take good people, which I would consider libertarians, generally speaking, from a political philosophy standpoint and an economic philosophy standpoint, to be good people, because those are the right ideas to create a wealthy society in terms of private property rights and capitalism and all the good stuff.
Right.
We need those people to be engaged and present the answers. Otherwise, we're going to get more Mandamis and AOCs winning, and these people, because there's so many problems in our society, and libertarians get back and say, yeah, that's fine. I'm working on my treatise on this and that. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, an outright communist just got elected, and guess what? Your business is now shut down. You're never going to be able to finish your book. You know what I mean? So that's the difference, I guess, of the sense of urgency of the times we're in.
Right.
We're going to go to questions.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to ask the first two questions, and then anyone who wants to ask a question can come line up. So reminder, let's not go too long on the questions because I think we're going to have a lot. So first question will be for Mattheus. First off, can you give me some real concrete examples of how we've achieved freedom without the political process, number one, and then two, if you had either a large sum of money or a large group of people willing to work on a project with you to achieve liberty, what would you do?
The first thing that comes to mind of freedom, victory without the state and political action is cryptocurrency, right? And the whole cypherpunk project, right? And the idea of freedom through encryption and through software. I mean, that's just explicitly alien to the state. Hostile even, and yet is still carving out huge realms for freedom for people. The second question about, if I had a ton of money and a ton of bodies to throw at some problem, what would I do for freedom? What would be my plan?
Yeah, if you had $100 million tomorrow, what would you do?
Boy,
Don't print it, it's fine.
now it's not worth as much then to me. That's a really good question. I don't know. I think I would probably pursue some kind of economic zone solution, some kind of Gulch, some kind of carve out startup city solution, something like that, to try to create the civilizational stack sort of from the ground up among good principles, even at a tiny micro scale. I might try to do something like that. I don't know if that's the best idea, but that's just what came to my mind right now.
Brandon, so as many of us know, you recently ran for city council, and unfortunately you didn't win, and I don't think anyone here believes that you didn't win because of lack of effort. So do you feel like that effort is wasted? And not just for you, but for a lot of other people, right? Everyone who runs for election and doesn't win, do they accomplish anything? The millions of dollars that we spend going back and forth, is anything accomplished? And is that something you think we should keep pursuing?
Yes, I'm glad. I have no regrets about running. I regret losing, of course, but I'm glad I ran. There was a lot of benefits for me getting involved, right? I built a network of individuals. I found other liberty-minded individuals in my city, in my community. I can network with them. I set out before I even ran, I said, I'm going to win something even if I lose the election. And I'm building a network and a group of individuals coming together that believe in liberty and freedom that I can turn into an organized force for political change years down the road, right? You got to have that, and it's that long-term time preference, right? It's a long time preference looking not just this election cycle, but multiple years down the road. That's where political action also has to focus, not just on next week also, But I'm glad I did it. I met so many people. I made a name for myself in the city, and I've built connections and relationships that I wouldn't have otherwise. The biggest mistake people have when they run for office is then they disappear and when they lose, right? And I've seen this over so many years. I've been politically active for 10 years here in Colorado, and I've worked on campaigns. I used to do that back in the previous life, this and that. And it's like, these people are awesome. And they're talking about, I can, like, the great stuff. And then, like, they lose and they're so dejected, and then you never see them again. Literally. They're just gone. And it's like, we could just have those people. It's like, you got to stick with it. And you take and you learn and you grow and you keep going. You know what I mean? But we can't give up at the first sign of trouble. or else we're never going to make it anywhere. So it was worth it. I encourage everybody else to do it. It was an incredible experience, and there's a lot of opportunity for individuals who are willing to. It's so empowering to go door to door and actually talk to people in your neighborhood and share these ideas with them. And when they agree with you, you're like, heck yeah, this is awesome.
Matthews, question to you.
Yeah.
I believe I understood your point as like political activism is useless and almost immoral. But what do you think regarding political activism in very specific kind of community, homeowner association? Do you consider it the same way or different? And if different, why?
So you're asking about the difference I might feel between political action in the general political world versus political action in associations or covenants or like in communities, things like that?
Homeowner association.
Homeowner
exactly.
associations. So I find it sort of equally unhygienic and disgusting, but not immoral, because you're still using the same political skills. You're still having to do the dealing and the trying to get your way against a majority of other people and all that. But the structure itself is predicated on a voluntary social contract that we're all here together to organize a neighborhood and a community, and there's an actual fair, electorate of people that are running the homeowner association, whatever. Like, that's not true for the state writ large. The state is not organized by a social contract. That's an Enlightenment era myth that has never been true. The state is born out of conquest. And so there's a veneer of legitimacy and a veneer of voluntarism and social contract over it. So I don't think it's immoral to participate in democratic or political situations in voluntary organizations and associations. I still kind of find it gross, just because I don't like using those skills. I don't like that kind of activity. But I don't think it's immoral to argue your case in front of the homeowners association and to try to convince your neighbors that this should be the case instead of that should be the case. So I think it's a different category. Mm-hmm.
See, that's interesting because I think I'd actually disagree with you on that point. My point was going to be to you is that politics, I think in this conversation, we've isolated politics as just a governmental point.
Yeah, electoral politics.
Electoral politics. Yeah. But my point is going to be is that politics is everywhere in life. Mm-hmm. And you do have to deal with it in a governmental fashion. And this may not be the ideal, but this is what we have. And the other point, and this is weird because it kind of gets into it's not really a social construct, but it is, I think, in the basis of specifically at least America with how it was set up. Is the point I saw recently is that America is made up of citizens. And being a citizen, you have inherent privileges, rights, but also responsibilities that, at least until recently in the world, most people in the world did not have. And given that the alternative is just violence, since you have a system where you can vote, isn't voting, at least voting, maybe not going as far as Brandon wants, but at least voting, because I can tell you with at least the Libertarian Party, we have 39,000 people, only 20,000 to 25,000 ever vote. So it seems like those people have a responsibility to at least come out and vote on Election Day.
Why do you think the opportunity to vote entails the responsibility to vote?
Because I think that it is, as weird as this is to say, it is ultimately it is a way of manifesting your own destiny.
Well, yeah, but is that true in any other circumstance? Like, if I have the opportunity to shoot a gun, do I have the responsibility to shoot a gun? If I have the opportunity to go to space, do I have the responsibility to go to space? If I have the opportunity to do, I just don't see how it follows from, I have the special thing that no one else in the world until recently has, true.
Right.
Right? We have a direct say in our political process and all that. But I guess I'm not following, I think there's a logic you're trying to make, but I just want to pull it out. What is the logic of you have this privilege, therefore you have a responsibility to use it as frequently as you're legally able to?
Yes, and I guess the argument I would make again to you is because unfortunately there are a lot of really fucking dumb, stupid people who vote. Like a woman who I saw in a debate who will tell you that the right to life is both subjective and objective, but can't give you a reason of why that is in either way. If you are smart enough, which you definitely are, to,
Said it, not me.
you know, be voting that way. And it is really just a plea of you would vote how I would want
Yeah,
to
right.
vote, so I want you to vote.
Probably.
That's really what it comes down to. Is it is a gang warfare thing and a power struggle, and we
Yeah.
need your vote for the power struggle.
I hear you. And voting in you know, in a democratic context is replacing soldiers in a civil war, right? Like the reason the majority wins in voting is because that would have been the number of male bodies that your side would have had to contest the war against the other person that wants to defeat you, right? So we have a cleaner version of it than everyone dying. But I guess a more straightforward response would just be like, well, if that's your concern, then the effort should be towards limiting the franchise, not towards trying to get every single person out to vote. Like if you're concerned that like, oh, we're going to be drowning in idiocratic, you know, voters that don't know what subjective versus objective means. Therefore, you, the smart person, I'm telling you, you need to go do this. It's like, that doesn't seem to follow. What seems to follow is we should make IQ tests required to vote, or something, or whatever. Do you see what I'm saying?
But without power, we can't make those kind of changes. Okay, sorry.
Next question.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is for Mattheus. So you said earlier that people need to be educated into liberty. And I would argue that people are educated out of liberty through like public school systems and everything. So, and a lot of the ways that we focus, like within the Libertarian Party of Colorado, is local elections and like school boards and the like where you can have some kind of effect upon the curriculum that students are taught, and you know maybe ensure that they don't have a chop-and-dictomy at 4. But I would just like to hear you argue against that.
Oh well, I mean, I don't know that I said that people have to be educated in liberty. They can be, right? I was exposed to ideas of liberty, and that changed my life, and that's how I ended up in this chair. Certainly, people don't have to be educated. They can be born with parents and friends and families in a voluntary, gentle, peaceful way where they just end up having libertarian default, outcomes. I do think that people are educated into tyranny, and I think that is a huge problem.
But if we can affect positive change, then the opposite.
If it was free, then of course, right? All other things equal, I would love that. But the question goes back to what's the opportunity cost, right? Like, what would it take for that to be true in terms of all the other millions of man hours that could be spent in other types of things? What would it take to be true to take the stake through this vampire's heart? I don't know, and I don't know that there aren't other equally worthy vampire hearts out there that we should be trying to drive a stake into.
Yes. I got too close, my bad. Javier Milei is wildly the most successful libertarian president in history. Would you have voted for him? Would you have asked him to run? Or would you have told him to go and read a book and spread liberty that way?
Hold on. There's a bunch of good. I didn't hear all the options. Would I have voted for him? Would I have told him to what?
Would you have voted for him? Would you have told him not to run and start a book club?
No, I probably would have voted for him, frankly, just because I would want to participate in the outrageous possibility that an actual Rothbardian, somehow got famous. But I think that he is one of those rare cases, right? It's like he's an exception, not the rule. Like the rule is most people shouldn't run for office, in my view. Other exceptions? Certainly. I think Milei is probably, a good exception to that. Although on paper, it doesn't seem like he would have been a great politician, but, surprises everywhere. So, although I may not have voted for him because I probably would have wanted to stay pure anyway, but.
All right, great job, everyone. This is excellent. I love it. I agree with some of those things, but I think at the end of the day, the ditch still is the same for everyone, with whether you're a cultural savant or a political, Right now, we are dealing with a hyper-polarized culture, right? And it's politically driven in that feedback loop, right? I think there's two things, and I obviously love following up with the Milei question because my question directly bounces off that. Our election system is completely broken, and I think that is why a lot of people are disenfranchised. If we were to fix this election system, if we were to clean up how our process is done, and then follow suit with representation of proper candidates, how would each of you take that in follow suit? Maybe we see a Milei, and what are your thoughts on how Milei is operating his government?
Can you give some detail on what you mean by it being cleaned up? Like what do you imagine is the perfect electioneering process?
I think at the end of the day, we are dealing with a disenfranchised voter base who thinks that elections are rigged, elections are compromised, electronic voting systems, paper ballot, mail-in ballots. This whole overall apparatus. I think there is a solution, and I think the solution is reinvigorating the trust in our election process. So for both of you,
if it came to be, if it were the case that everyone believed elections were fair and honest and legitimate, how would that change how we feel about this?
Yes.
Do you want to answer? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see, just to back up slightly, I'd love to see in-person, same-day voting, no more mail-in ballots. You got to show an ID. You got to do that. That'd be amazing. That'd be great. Make it a national holiday. Make it a whole thing. You have people actually be more civic participation. I know, very unlibertarian of me, but hey, the government shut down that day. That's a good thing.
Yes.
I think that is, you hit the nail on the head in terms of a lot of people. Why a lot of people don't participate? Because they feel disenfranchised. They feel it's rigged. So I feel like if there was something that restored trust in the election system, we would see positive outcomes, generally speaking. It's hard to say exactly, but yeah, I see a lot of on social media, especially a lot of the people on the right who are saying everything's rigged, this and that, and they're never going to vote because of it. And that's part of maybe the whole conspiracy idea is like, hey, listen, we're going to tell everybody it's rigged so nobody votes. You know what I mean? Except for our people. I don't know.
I think if the election system were just taken to be fair and honest and true and legitimate, like just by default, that's what everyone believed, and that was the case. I think you would see better representatives. You would see people with more honor and dignity choose to run, right? Because they're not going to be risking their dignity and their time and energy, that presumably is very valuable to them, in some kind of crapshoot of 75% chance they Bernie Sanders me at the DNC or whatever, right?
Would that change your opinion on how you participate?
Yeah, it would lean me being towards more sympathetic to Brandon's position if that were true.
Actually, this is interesting. This leads into my question, is that we know the system is rigged, so why don't we plan that the system is rigged? So Brandon and I were actually talking about this as secret societies. It's like, would it make more sense to put our resources, let's say we have $10 million, should we try to get a councilman with that $10 million or create a society to get leverage on a few people already in Congress or whatever to try to get something into a bill? Does that idea disagree with anything you guys are trying to do? Or you're like, oh no, I still would keep the same.
Ooh, it's kind of hard because I think that there are liberty gains to be made by gaming a corrupt system. But I think that the more you game a corrupt system, the more corrupt it becomes, and the harder it is to use that vehicle for further liberty gains, right? So I don't have a real strong immoral problem, in principle on a libertarian basis, of using the state or paying off someone in the state to let you do something that you have the natural right to do anyway, or whatever. It's like Rothbard's point about bribing cops or something, right? So I think that there's all sorts of things that you could do that are licit from a pure libertarian theory standpoint that would probably make some gains of buying off this politician or setting this up in this way. But I think it would erode trust in the fiction of the social contract we live in that paradoxically actually allows for the kind of gameplay that Brandon is opposing. So I think it would be short-term win at the expense of medium to long-term cost.
Yeah, $10 million, you could buy an island out in the Atlantic somewhere and, blackmail politicians and use that to leverage, to get political change that you want,
Take a few photos.
Invite some kids to hang out.
We've seen that happen, right? But no, I mean, what politics is war by other means, right? I feel like especially, and I don't want to rationalize, there's boundaries. You don't want to do anything immoral or steal or hurt anybody. But at the same time, if you're playing in a rigged game and you aren't playing fair, well, nobody's playing fair. If you're the only one who's going to play fair, you're the only kid reading the rules to Candyland and say, hey guys, you can't do that, and they've already won the game, then yeah, you lose. You know what I mean? So if we're in a rigged system that's unfair, I have no problem saying be as unfair as you can to try and rig it back. So as long as you're not morally violating somebody's rights, obviously.
That's right. So you're willing to play dirty. Okay.
You're feeding into my point about the corrosive effect of political action.
All right.
Come see the violence inherent in the system.
Brandon, question for you. do you believe it's moral to give the right to vote to people who do not pay taxes? And if you will be elected, if you would be elected, would you do something regarding that?
I think that people who are net tax consumers should not be able to vote on tax issues.
Like me.
You know what I mean? Like say you receive more tax money through welfare benefits than you pay into the system, and a tax is on the ballot, you shouldn't be able to vote for that. I do agree with that because you're just voting to steal somebody else's money. Ultimately, this is the idea back at the beginning of the country was the idea is like, hey, property owners should be the only ones to vote. Ultimately, you own property, you have a stake in it, and the Hoppe idea, like your vote is proportional to how much property you own. Sure. I think that's a much more moral and ethical system, generally speaking. Now, if it's a non-tax issue and we're voting to, something that affects the civil rights or civil liberties of other individuals, like say legalizing marijuana, yeah, it doesn't matter if you pay taxes or not. You should be able to vote on that one, I would say. So that's kind of where I draw the line. You can't vote to steal more money from other people. I mean, you shouldn't be able to do that anyway, but ultimately I would say, yes, I do. I would say that is not right.
How about though on issues that are not directly related to tax, but are goods, right? Like SNAP benefits or other type or school types of things. But like spending bills.
If you're a net tax consumer and not a taxpayer, then you should not be able to vote on
any kind of
tax dispensing tax money.
Spending
tax money. I would say that's my belief.
Now, second part of the question: what would you do if you would be elected?
Yeah, don't skirt the issue.
If I was elected, there'd probably be nothing I could do because I'd be the only one with that position, and I'd get outvoted every time I could. I'd get recalled or worse.
No on the tax increases, though. You would be the lone vote no.
True. Yes.
My question is very serious. Why are neither of you wearing a bow tie? You call yourself libertarians?
You want to go first? Or you want to go first?
I didn't realize it was a dress code. As a Ron Paul Republican who gave up on that a while back, realizing it wasn't real, who wasn't involved in the Libertarian Party, but is thinking about it. What about the leftists that control it? What can we do? What can be done about that? How can you reconcile the open borders with the welfare state? All of the stuff they're doing with kids, all that stuff.
Yeah.
What can be done? That's the problem. Big problem.
What can be done specifically about?
We have to. If they control the party, then we're not going to run candidates like.
I get you. So in Colorado specifically, we have a Democratic control. Basically, run as a Democrat. Change your voter registration. We have open primaries in Colorado. You don't have to show up at assembly or caucus meetings. You can petition on the ballot, focus on dinner table issues like the cost of living, affordability, crime, homelessness, issues that are not social in nature. You know what I mean? And then, run as a Democrat. I have no problem with anybody doing that. If you're in Denver, you should probably run as a Democrat, change your voter registration. Who cares? I don't care what party you belong to. Party politics is on its way out anyway. Looking at most recent voter registration data, under 24, it's like 80% of Coloradans are unaffiliated. It was always like 50, 50, 50. Now it's like it's getting to the point where it's going to be 90%, not like 9 out of 10 people are not going to be registered with a political party in a generation here in Colorado. So political parties are on their way out one way or the other. I think that's something that's going to be very interesting to see how that happens. But I don't care. It doesn't matter what party you're in. Party's just a mechanism to get on the ballot. It doesn't mean anything ultimately.
I took his question to mean not like I took his question to mean more like I was disenfranchised with the Ron Paul Republican type stuff afterwards. Period. Comma. What do we do about crazy leftists ruining society? So like I think your strategy might be valid.
No, if they control the party, then obviously you answer the question. Don't be a libertarian, but then ballot access is the issue, right? So anyway, I'll go. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do about 3 more questions. If we have one last question behind Corey.
Not sure. I just make friends with leftists. I don't know how to defeat them.
Okay, so I feel like we are in a very electoral heavy room, and most of the pushback has been for Mattheus. So as the token crypto anarchist agorist, I'm going to give Brandon a little more pushback. So personally, I don't think that voting gets you any more freedom or me any more freedom. I vote for all these different things. It accomplishes literally nothing. even like maybe I'm the one vote that shifts the bill over, and maybe I get that tiny little tangible bit of freedom, but that's about a 1 in a million chance that happens. It's probably actually worse than that. The things that give you true tangible freedom as an individual are things like being healthy, things like being wealthy, being off grid, having alternative forms of payment like Monero or Bitcoin, and not being on the banking system. Being as sovereign and independent as you can is the best way to achieve true freedom for yourself. So given that, why don't more libertarians focus on that? Why are libertarians so focused on electoral politics when they could achieve more tangible freedom for themselves?
Because even if you have that tangible freedom, I mean, the government still controls the electricity. They still control they have regulate the internet. You know, ultimately, it can come to a point where your Bitcoin is maybe not seized, but you could be shut off from accessing the internet without a digital ID. I mean, we know that they're trying to push that eventually. You know what I mean? So it's like you still have a stake in everything you do to, even if you can do as much as you can personally, but you're only one individual. And sure, your one vote might not be the one vote that shifts the ballot measure or gets that candidate elected. But that's why I think voting's not enough. You can talk to everybody in your neighborhood, and all of a sudden you got 10 votes, 50 votes, 100 people. Yeah, statistically it's one person. But if everybody starts thinking they're that one person, then you're going to lose. And then nobody's going to win, not the right side. The wrong people are going to win that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think that's one already happening because most people recognize the reality that their vote doesn't matter. But two, to your point about digital IDs, which is a very real thing that's happening, we're not going to vote that out. That's going to happen. That's going to happen across the world. And the only way we can push it back is either with massive social pushback or by building technological systems to get around it. I think those are the only answers. I do not think Thomas Massey or the next person that we get elected has anywhere near the ability to actually stop this.
I think, and this is a little bit different point than what you're bringing up, but you talked about the massive social pushback, and I know people have talked about the idea of like revolution and this and that. If you don't exhaust the political means first, then it's a very hard to have the legitimacy to go beyond the political means, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, if you can't win at the ballot box and then people want to go to different directions to push back on the state, it's like, you got to exhaust all options and say, hey, we did everything right, politically speaking. This is our last resort to have more of a forceful pushback, if that makes sense.
I think that's true. To answer your other part of your question, Josh, why do people do more political activism? Well, because it's easier, for God's sake, than it is to improve your life. To like do all the hundreds of hours of research and effort and painstaking, try to fix up things. It's way easier just to, outsource it to the system. So that's my cynical answer about it. But
yes, to echo that sentiment, I think that we are seeing a hyperpolarization on both sides. The left wants socialism and the right wants authoritarianism. Both equally, undermine the liberties of individuals. So regardless of the end goal of using electoral politics as a means to an end, I think it's a fruitful endeavor. I do think parallel economies are a solution. However, Brandon, I'm asking you right now is just like, where does this amount shift? How do we make this shift happen in our voter base? Are we outreaching to younger people? Are we trying to? What are the principles of liberty? And I just think that it's a lost battle right now because everyone is so cult of personality with Trump, and capitalism's failed, therefore socialism is solution. And these are polarizing opposition. So your thoughts on that?
That's one person at a time. That's all we can do. One person at a time, and that's the next guy who's going to start a podcast and do live streams, or the next person who's going to figure out how to get that next brilliant political savant who's going to get something passed on the ballot. It's going to be the next Ron Paul. One person at a time, that's where we got to focus our efforts. Anything that's beyond that is too grandiose, ultimately. We do what we can on the individual level to educate, inspire, and motivate people to get involved, to have a voice, to speak out, stand up, and be part of the solution, be the leader in your own community. Nobody's going to come in and save us. We have to do it ourselves. And that's ultimately every single person in here. I would call you to do that, to be that leader in your own community, and talk to one person, and that's where it starts.
Really quick follow-up. How many years do you think before we're all eating squirrels over a Spitfire? Both asking questions for both. Because it's not long.
Driving through downtown Denver, I think I already saw that tonight.
I'd say, I don't know, 30, 40 years. till we get to like a Mad Max wasteland apocalyptic survival simulation?
No, we're going to be a free state. We're going to live in a better quality of life than we've ever seen. We're going to be wealthier and healthier ultimately as a society because good people are going to stand up, be leaders, and speak truth to power.
Vote for Brandon Wark, everyone.
All right. On that note, any closing statements you guys want to make? Mattheus, you go first. Take 2 to 3 minutes, and then Brandon, and then we will call it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want my position here to come across as categorical, right? I think that there's little like rooms and realms for political action to be successful and useful. I think, though, and I would like to see maybe articulated, if you want to have this conversation over beer sometime, what is the bounded domain of reasonable and rational political activism that everyone can do, maybe most people should do, but beyond that, here's other things we need to be doing, right? Like we sort of like tossed around the football about like political action as this like doing the run play versus the pass play, and this kind of football metaphor. And I kind of find that interesting, and I'd be on board with a metaphor like that, where it's like, no, look, the run play is important. You need the first down. You're not going to pass when it's 4th and inches. You're going to figure this, whatever. But obviously, you're not going to. The entire game is not just going to be running, And so I'd like to, think about or articulate with you what that would look like so that political action remains viable for the people that are extremely skilled and extremely motivated and extremely competent and want that and can actually, win can win that over and over again. But it's not presented as this like total general purpose solution of how we're all going to win. So if you're not doing it, 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 if you're not, you're shirking your duty. I think that's too broad of a perception to take. And so I'm open to a small, window of it where it's valid and legitimate and viable. But I've never heard that presented so far.
No, that's extremely interesting and compelling, and I do think that there's good questions there, right? It's to each according to their own abilities. How about that? You know what I mean? But it's every individual being able to make what makes sense to you, right? You have maybe you have more time this next electoral year or this electoral cycle than you will 2 years from now because you're starting a family. You do what you can, you fight where you can, but you're always looking for those opportunities, right? And the pendulum is swinging. There's going to be incredible opportunities here in Colorado for liberty to make real gains, but it's years in the making, folks. You got to put in the work. You got to keep fighting. You can't give up. And ultimately, so for freestatecolorado.com, definitely subscribe to Free State Colorado on YouTube. I just hit 10,000 subscribers today, so that's pretty exciting. I got 11,000 on X, but nonetheless, so this week I asked some of Colorado's conservative leaders this exact question, kind of thinking about this debate. I said, what's it going to take to turn Colorado around? What can we do to make Colorado more of a free state? So I asked Heidi Ganal, John Caldera, and Jeff Hunt. I had them all on this week, so that Caldera's video comes out on Friday, but I asked them all the exact same question. You guys have been in the political fight for years here in Colorado. What do you think it's going to take? So I definitely encourage you to watch those videos because they're very interesting, and there's definitely a lot of talk of long-term time preference in terms of building the infrastructure of the organization and being ready for those opportunities when they do present themselves. But if we don't put in the work and some opportunity comes along, we can miss it, So I'm an optimist, I'm hopeful, and I know we have so many great people here in this room that are going to do great things for liberty here in Colorado. So appreciate you all.
That's our debate. Give it up for Brandon and Mattheus.